I recently asked myself if my zealous interest in this Epstein saga aligns with my primary identity as a Christian. As a newsman, it makes sense. This is a very interesting story. It's something that they'll probably make a movie about, assuming that the world doesn't crash because of it. And it also makes sense because I learned some time ago that the world is not what it seems, that we live in this, I think it was Eric Weinstein who called it a managed reality. I'm sure there others have called it. And it's normally dubbed the conspiratorial view, but I think everyone is starting to realize that's really the way that things are. And I think the Epstein saga has helped reinforce that and has helped others realize that that's the case. In the same way that COVID, I think, helped people realize that their governments weren't benevolent, that they were being lied to, that there are forces beyond the institutions that they thought had various powers and responsibilities and were even interested in doing good. That wasn't the case. So we continue to learn that what we think is happening, what we are told is happening, the world that we perceive is not the case. And so I've been obsessed, I guess you could call it that, with this story. Any of you who follow me on social media and whatnot, you've probably realized that. All four or five of you, and I've engaged with some of you, and I report on this quite frequently for the New American Magazine, which is where I primarily write. But I kept thinking, I was like, okay, I'm a human being, and so I have that tendency to sometimes get drawn in, to get pulled by the flesh, meaning that as humans, even though we're Christian, we have a fallen nature of some sort. The flesh itself has a tendency to want to suck you in to things that aren't necessarily spiritual, that aren't even necessarily aligned with God's plan for your life and those things that pleases God. I mean, let's face it, this is something we all know. So I found myself wondering, like, what is this? How am I so obsessed with this? Like, why am I so interested in this? Is there an element here that is indicative? Is there something to it that is more than just what we're seeing? And I don't think I'm going to come up with anything that others haven't necessarily thought about, but I like to connect the conspiratorial element of this to what I think is the spiritual element. And again, this is not something that I'll be the only one who ever thought of it. I'm sure others have already. In fact, I read something very interesting from in Substack last night, and I agreed with a lot of it, and it was pretty strong. So I want to go back to the beginning, kind of, at least the most recent news item, and I have a story in the Substack here about the story that I just wrote. And so recently, um, Thomas Massey and Ro Khanna, who are the co-sponsors of the Epstein Files Transparency Law, um, they went in and they saw unredacted versions of FBI files. And they learned a few things. First of all, they were able to reveal the names of 6 people in 2 hours that they realized, that they figured out, who were redacted, who they shouldn't have been redacted. And one of those names was Leslie Wexner, who was more or less Epstein's beneficiary. He's this billionaire who owns I don't know, like the Limited and Victoria's Secret and Abercrombie Fitch or whatever. But Leslie Wexner was well known. Everybody knew, at least everyone who had been keeping up with this, knew about Leslie Wexner. He pretty much is the one who is credited or is suspected of having gotten Epstein kind of off the ground. He gave him like power of attorney over his fortune, which was bizarre. And so Leslie Wexner, it turns out, was listed at one point in 2019, at least, if this FBI internal file is legitimate, which everyone says it is. The FBI hasn't denied it. It's going bananas all over the internet. And so there's this file, and it lists like 9 people. 8 of them, I believe, are listed as co-conspirators, and that includes Ghislaine Maxwell. It also includes Jean Brunel Vuc, I believe, the former model scout, the French model scout, who who died by suicide in 2022, I believe. And so he was linked to this. He just happened to up and died, like so many people tied to this thing. But Wexner came up, and today there was a hearing, that being Wednesday. Wednesday, there was a hearing, and Attorney General Pam Bondi showed up before the House committee. And of course, it turned into a circus, but there were lots of questions about uh, the Epstein handling, because the DOJ has obviously way bungled this up. And one of the questions that Thomas Massey asked, actually, I think it was the main question was, who decided that we, no, he said, like, look, we've been told that there's no conspirators. And he brought up Kash Patel, director, the FBI, his, I think back in, I don't know, August or November, or whenever, he said, if we had any more information that there was anyone involved, I would have followed that yesterday. And everyone's like, are you telling us there really is like no one involved? And that was essentially his assertion. That's been their position since. And apparently they're sticking to it. You got to give it to them. Um, I don't know what you call it. I don't know if it's courage or stupidity or like ignorant naivete, but they're sticking to the story. And that begs the question. First of all, Pam Bondi never answered the question about who made the decision to delist Wexner as a co-conspirator. Now, he operated under the assumption that that was the case, but maybe that's not the case. Maybe they're just lying that there was no other co-conspirators, that they know that there's other co-conspirators. I think if you read the files, I think you realize it's like, yeah, there's lots of other people involved. They've been lying the whole time. We suspected they were lying the whole time. And the more we look at these things, we realize they have been lying. They're lying. They're lying about everything. They're lying all the time. They've been lying about it for years. And we got these files, and we didn't even get all the files, by the way. We got half of the files that we're supposed to get. And according to one of the lawmakers, Kana, who made this thing happen, he says like 70 to 80% of the files are redacted. I don't know about you, but I haven't read a file that doesn't have redactions. So that sounds about true. I don't think I've read any that don't have redactions. And, they pushed through some other unredactions, including we found out who the sender of that email back in 2009 was about. The guy was like, "Hey, where are you?" And he said, "By the way, I loved the torture video." Remember that? That was bizarre. Well, that was that was Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayman. He's the CEO of DP World, and so he sent that. And now, when they originally released that file, and I think even as of today, when I checked it last, his name is still blacked out. So they still haven't actually officially unblacked it out. But we know because Thomas Massey revealed he went in there, and so he revealed who it was. So what we're realizing is that there is a power behind the DOJ, behind the government. There is a power that is fighting tooth and nail to keep this secret, to keep the names of the people who are involved secret. And, there's some really disturbing stuff in there. Now, if anyone is tempted, if anyone is watching and is tempted to start talking about how this is a Trump thing or whatever, it's like you're like you're swimming in the little kids pool. I don't know how else to tell you. It's like if you still think this is like a partisan issue, if you're still like operating in the Democrat right wing paradigm, if you think this is what this is about, you're in the little kids pool, man. You're not. You're like way, way behind. It's like you need to catch up because this is way bigger than that. The people who are involved in this, some of the names that are named, it's like they don't look at politics like like Carol Quigley said in his book Tragedy and Hope, and I'm going to paraphrase. He basically said that this idea of the two-party system, that's something for dumb people. It's a joke. It's a joke played on dumb people, on the masses, which they look down on. So it's like you need to get out of the kids pool. Okay, like this isn't this idea. The partisan lens is like that's elementary. That's like rookie stuff. Okay, like grow up. What we this thing has spanned. First of all, this thing's been happening since like the 1990s. So if you take all that in consideration, we're looking at Clinton, we're looking at George W. Bush, we're looking at Obama, we're looking at Biden, we're looking at Trump. Okay. If anything, you could say that, first of all, Epstein was arrested during the Trump tenure, and and we got files, albeit um, redacted in nature and whatever, but we got files for the first time under Trump. That's not to say that Trump necessarily wanted to make this happen. I think his problem is he ran his big fat mouth, as he tends to do. He said he was going to do it, although he did it with some hesitation. I remember watching the videos, and I think if you look it up, the various times that he was asked about it, he's like, yeah, I'll do it, but we have to be careful. It's like it's going to suck in people that is innocent people and stuff like that. So we know that it at least has, the hammer has come down on one of his really good friends, and that's his Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick. He's getting a lot of crap because he lied about having communication with Epstein, even though even though he said he didn't after he was conviction. It's clear that Letnick did. He was, questioning Congress. Now, look, I think they're going a little way harder at Letnick than they should. I'm not saying that it was okay to yell, to lie, whatever, but it seems like based on the files, um, Lutnick was like on a yacht, his family yacht, with his friends and their family and their kids and whatever, and he had lunch with Epstein. There's nothing else that it seems like he did. So, that's the least worst of it. There's stuff in there that's really, really disturbing. There's a guy who sent, well, I think it might be a gal who sent Epstein an email, and she said, "I call him now my future husband, and we were talking about daughter. I thought I would never be able to kill somebody in my life. I was wrong. I might escape anyway. Miss you, Jeffrey." Obviously, there's no context. And then she says, "Big kiss, although now you probable won't like to kiss me anymore." Um, that's it. Isn't that weird? Like, what does that mean? I thought I would never be able to kill somebody in my life. I was wrong. There's another, and so we don't know who that is, by the way. We don't know who that is. It's like, why did they redact that? Right? They're hiding. They're protecting someone. They're obviously protecting that person. And that's like one of a many. There was another email, and this one we know it's from Martin Nowak, and he sent something to Ghislaine, and it said, "Dear Ghislaine, many thanks again for your amazing hospitality. I'm so very sorry I caused you so much worry and that I spoiled this day. I am so happy that I did not kill anybody. My perspective of life has changed somehow. Lots of love, Martin." That's a weird thing. So obviously there was some incident there um, that almost ended up with him killing someone, right? It's like, wow, that's weird. And so we're told to basically look at these things and just kind of move on. It's like, you got your files, now move on. Obviously that's not happening. And then there's some really bizarre stuff. And um, I don't necessarily like to get into speculation, but I do in the sense that when it's fun. But I wouldn't be getting into this if it doesn't align with what we keep hearing, what we keep learning. And I think this falls a line with with my belief, and I think it's a absolutely legitimate belief that all this is tied to satanic rituals. What we're looking at is diabolical. We're hearing about pedophilia and all this really like weird, I guess rough sex and whatnot. But listen to this testimony. So there's someone who went into the New York FBI office and he gave this testimony, and he said that he first met Epstein when he was 4, and he was raped by his uncle and whatnot. And then he said that he was on a yacht trip, and he said there were unknown male blacks were engaged in sex acts with unknown female whites who had their backs slashed and were bleeding. Also, someone described several infants being killed and their intestines removed, as well as other acts of cannibalism. It also said that former U.S. President George H.W. Bush, he was engaged in a sex act with an unknown male, black, and a black male. Former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and businessman George Soros were there at the yacht, and while all the aforementioned acts of violence were happening. And then was asked, he was then asked if he had any injuries or scars or evidence, and he said he had some on his butt. He was, and so he also provided a handwritten list of family and extended families, and it was not clear what investigative value. And so, um, this guy was saying that he was on this boat and people were on drugs, and um, he was raped by Jeffrey Epstein and President Clinton while in a heavily induced state. Okay, drug induced state. So that's like really weird. That's like really weird. And I think that you hear stuff like that, and our initial reaction is to basically uh, discard it because it's like, man, that's obviously got to be sensational. That's got to be something that maybe was planted there. And I do think there's a chance. I that they planted stuff in that file, sensational stuff to perhaps discredit the whole thing. But I was reading this Substack that I had mentioned earlier by Wise Wolf, and I think they're mostly anonymous except for one person. And the author said something, well, not something, this is what he said. He said, the reason these people get away with what they do is that they operate so far beyond the boundaries of what normal humans can conceive of, that your inability to believe is the security system. So it's kind of weird. As a writer, I've believed that for a long time, because I believe there's lots of these conspiracies that they're so outrageous that people just don't believe them. And some of them weren't even that outrageous. I mean, I don't know, 5, 10 years ago, you used to tell people that there is a, conspiratorial international elite class who actually has most of the power. They would laugh at you and whatever. And I think because it's just hard for people to fathom. And I think another reason is that people just don't want to come to these conclusions, because then you're left with a question like, well, what do I do? And then you don't want to do anything. Let's face it, for most of us, we don't want to do anything. I'm in that hard place where it's like I've said before, it's like I really like my life, but there's this element here, outside. Once you step outside my little Kentucky farm here, things are not what they seem. And at some point, that stuff's going to come to your doorway. Okay. And I mean, in some way, it already has. Our communities are affected. They're infected by this cabal, by the control, by the dark forces in this world. And so I think that's where we're starting to meet the spiritual aspect of this. As Christians, we grew up and always, learning that there are dark forces, there are demons, there are demonic forces, there are satanic forces and whatnot. There's possession and whatnot. Like, we believe that. We believe, the verses where it talks about, the prince the prince of the air, that Satan he has a hold for now over the planet here. But I think and I think this is mostly because as Americans, we live a very, very good life. And, we have um, a very luxurious, prosperous life for the most part still. And so I think it's hard for us to realize that this is still true. And then there's a distance. There's a distance between, um, we've always we've made it kind of like abstract. Like, yeah, there's evil, but it's kind of like, oh, it was mostly something that was talked about in the Bible, or it's far off and whatever. Or maybe it was like, it was definitely like during the communist years and whatever. But like more or less, it's like the people who are in control, the people who are in power, our governments, our institutions, or whatever. It's like, it's like, yeah, you have some bad people there, and maybe of course, you have some non-Christians, but to get to the point where you say it's like, not only are there non-Christians and you have some bad people, but then you have to go over next step, climb over the next hump to where you may just have to, you may be, um, you may encounter the possibility that these people um, are not just bad, some of them, or most of them, that there is a power in there that is satanic in very nature, and that they partake in rituals, in satanic rituals that people, that Satanists and Luciferians have been partaking in for hundreds and thousands of years. uh, there is Shannon Joy said something to along. Now, this is what she said. She said there is a darkness at the seat of power in America, and she pointed out that the reason this country is just going all sorts of like bad in all sorts of ways. We're eroding in so many ways. We got this massive rising debt. We have a cultural issue. We're on the verge of civil war. We have people here who hate their own country. We have a lot of depravity. We have growing poverty. We have lots of problems, lots of sickness, like literal sickness. That it's just not working. It's not that, and that may seem contrary to what I just said, that's like that I have a great life, but I think those are more anecdotal. I think when you take the country as a whole, it is on a trajectory where at some point it's all that brokenness is going to collapse the floor. And I think we're getting really close there. And the reason for that is because the people in charge, our institutions, are ruled and are led by satanic powers. Does that mean everyone in them is satanic? No. But the the people at the top, the people who are networking, the international elite club and whatnot, it turns out there's a good chance these people are outright satanic. You let that sink in. That's probably what we are dealing with. And if this does not get under control, then we're going to have a massive collapse of sorts. And so I don't know where this Epstein thing is going to go, but here's what I do know. And this is something I've always thought, I believed, was that the answer to societal, to American restoration at its core must come from the church. And that's Jesus Christ Church. That is the church that acknowledges the Trinity of Jesus Christ, the church that acknowledges that Jesus died and rose on the third day, and the church that knows that Jesus Christ is coming back. The church that knows that the Holy Spirit is in Christians and has the power to overcome anything. That's the church I'm talking about. Those Christians, that's what I'm talking about. Because what we have here in its, and when you strip everything down to its basic core, is we have a battle of good versus evil. Lots of people are starting to realize this. Lots of popular pundits and commentarians are coming to this realization. They've come to this realization. This is what we're looking at. This is what we saw when we saw the whole trans debate, when we saw the demonic Black Lives Matter riots, where you could see these people literally seething. The devil is working in America, and the best defense and even offense against that is Christ's church. So with that being said, is like, I think I'm not a faith leader. I don't run a church or whatever. I attend church. I enjoy attending church and whatever, it's like, but I think pastors and faith leader here, they need to step it up. I've thought this for a long time. I've believed the Western church and the American church has gotten a little too comfortable for a long time. I think some of the services are more like, uh like I don't like self-help sessions with like a sprinkle of Jesus. It's kind of like ridiculous. There's not a lot of talk about, the deeper things or whatever. It's like, you go to church and they'll tell you how Jesus wants you to like always win and be rich and healthy and and attract people or whatever. It's like there's some truth to that, but it's like that's not the gospel, and and they don't talk about evil and the issues that we face in that. They usually talk about it like in abstract ways, and especially because of the Johnson rule for the longest time, like churches wouldn't even say anything about certain things. I was a part of a big mega church in Georgia, and I remember there was an election coming, and they were afraid to say basically, don't vote for this guy because they believe in abortion, which kills babies. They said, vote biblical values. And so I've seen it. I've seen churches who are basically scared. We can't have that anymore. The church is the only bulwark against evil. It has proven so for decades. And like the Bible says, the gates of hell shall not prevail. Now, that also seems to imply that the gates of hell are trying. They're trying. And we have before us, we have a major, major issue. We are seeing firsthand what that looks like, what it looks like for the Prince of Darkness to have reign over the planet. We're seeing it in the Epstein files. I think that's what we're seeing here. Now, the question is, are we ever going to learn the full truth? I have no idea. I have no idea. I mean, we are ever. You want to say ever, but are we? What is that going to look like? There's a lot of verses in the Bible that says that basically everything will be brought to light. There's Luke 8:17. It says, "For there's nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open." And then there's another verse in 1 Corinthians 4:5 that almost seems to imply that perhaps we're really not going to find out everything, and everything is not going to be exposed until Jesus comes along. And it says, "Therefore judge nothing before the appointed time. Wait until the Lord comes. He will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and will expose the motives of the heart. At that time each will receive their praise from God." And then Ecclesiastics, the Old Testament there, 12:14 says, "For God will bring deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil." I think what we're looking at could be the beginning of the end of the beginning. We grew up learning all the time that Jesus is going to come back. And having read so much church history, having known about everyone thought that the end was near, including in the disciples, that they thought that Jesus would have come during their time. And obviously it hasn't happened. And I think maybe there was a point, maybe our generation is the one who's thinking, it's like, yeah. Well, they've been saying this forever and it never happens, but it will happen at some point. The Bible's never not been fulfilled. Is this it? I mean, how much worse could it get? I know that technically you look around, it's been worse. You've had plagues, you have wars and whatnot, but we are also moving in an area where the devil has the tools to gain the kind of control and manipulation over the people that has never been possible at any time in history. There are lots of things to consider because they are on the verge of developing and having technology that they can read your mind, that can manipulate you, that can do things that basically will eliminate free will and all freedom. So that's one of the litmus tests for me. Is it's like, if they develop and they pull this technology off and they enslave us, which is what they want to do, you have to think that that's probably like God. He's going to intervene. That's where Jesus comes in. And maybe what we're doing right now is we're getting a glimpse into how bad things are. And maybe further on, we'll get a glimpse into how out of control they are. Like, no matter what we want to do, maybe what it is it's just, we can try. And I'm certainly not, I have a friend, a colleague who talked, he gets frustrated when we talk about what's called religious neutralization. That being that a lot of people out there, they don't want to get involved. They don't necessarily want to spend their time, making sure that our government isn't violating the law, that they're working for the people, that criminals aren't peppered all throughout our government and our civic institutions and whatever. And so, we've run into people who are like, look, this is just the way it's going down. I'm just gonna, ride it out until God comes. And there's other people like us, I guess, who there's something in us and we won't, it just doesn't feel right to do that. You know, it just doesn't feel right to do that. And so my answer is my approach is going to be like, I'm going to oppose evil with whatever tools, whatever passion, whatever abilities I have, no matter, knowing that God's plan will prevail regardless. I just can't sit by and say, okay, well, I'll just stand by here and I'll hang out on my little Kentucky farm and until Jesus comes, and not really rise up or oppose any of the evil that's happening on, or telling people what's happening, whatever. That just doesn't seem right. So obviously it's up to everyone individually to choose what action they'll take, if they'll take any action. But I just can't imagine that taking no action is the right approach. So God bless you all. And oh yeah, I always forget to do this. If you made it this far and you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share this with others.